America is going bankrupt. You might think, how can a country like America go bankrupt? Well, it can, and this has caused significant distress for the US president to the extent that he is engaging in continuous meetings with the opposition party to address the impending crisis. Their tax revenue was less than what was predicted. Less money is coming in. The US government is spending $17 billion every day to keep its government functioning. It is believed that the US government's entire money will probably be exhausted. The American economy is projected to decline in 2024, and there are concerns that it may face a complete collapse thereafter.
Is the US dollar losing its dominance as a global currency reserve?
Ray, back in September, you said that the United States, you think, will be facing a debt crisis.
To the US now and that so-called debt ceiling.
This debt ceiling crisis is actually a political crisis.
We are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis.
America has one such superpower that no other country has. But how is this superpower becoming a real problem for America? What is happening in America? And in the next 10 years, what would the world economy look like? To understand the USA's situation, we first need to understand how countries acquire debt. You see, just like you and I get home loans, even countries take out debt in order to grow. And there are three popular ways to get these loans. The first way is through international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and development banks. Secondly, they could take loans from the commercial banks' wealth funds and bilateral loans from other countries. And the third way is to do it through bonds. In simple words, if the US needs $1 trillion to run its economy, it will come up with a $1 trillion government bond at 3% interest and will split it into 1 million units, with each unit costing $1 million. So after the bond is released, the government of China might buy $400 billion worth of units. The citizens of US might buy $200 billion worth of units. The Blackstone Group might buy $200 billion worth of units. And the government of Japan will also buy $200 billion worth of units. This way, the US will have $1 trillion to run its economy, and in return, the government will promise an interest of 3%. So every year, the US government will give out $30 billion in return to its investors, and depending on the units that every shareholder owns, they will get 3% of their principal in return every year. And after the maturity period of, say, 30 years, the government will return $1 trillion back to all the shareholders. And why do these countries own US bonds? Well, that is because it is a very safe investment instrument, and it is a very safe way to park your money. America's money is over. India's economy is about $3 trillion, and that of America is $23 trillion. Economically, America is 8 times bigger than India, but even this much money falls short for them. Why? Because of a simple formula, savings is equal to income minus expenses. If you earn in millions and spend in billions, then how on earth are you going to save? The economy of a country seems complex, but does run on this simple logic. Let us understand how. The US runs on a budgetary deficit. That is, their government spends more money than it earns through taxes or other means. Where does this extra money come from? They also have to take loans, have to borrow money. Why does the government do this? No, the government is not stupid, but to control the economy, you have to balance it. Let's understand some terms first. The US's finance ministry is called the Treasury Department. Their parliament is called Congress. All the laws are collectively made by the Congress. Consider the White House. Finally, the central bank of the US is called the Federal Reserve. Now let's come to the point. The expenses of the USA are much higher than their tax revenues. The US pays this difference with loans. The government's expenses are decided by some laws that the Congress has already passed, like military spending, Medicaid, Social Security benefits, etc. Similarly, they have created a system for debt called the debt ceiling. It says that, well, you need money to run the economy, so you can borrow money till this limit. If you hit that limit and you want to cross it, then you have to take permission. This debt ceiling has been increased 78 times since 1960. The most debt was taken in the presidency of Obama. That's $7.6 trillion of debt. After that comes Donald Trump, who borrowed $6.7 trillion. Biden, in just 1 year of presidency, has increased the debt by $2.5 trillion. In January 2023, the USA hit its debt ceiling. The debt then was $31 trillion. According to estimates, the US government had money in the bank to spend till the end of 2023. USA's tax returns are usually due in April. This year, their tax revenues were less than expected. Basically, their tax revenue was less than what was predicted. Less money came in. The US government spends $17 billion every day to keep its government functioning. That's why experts believe that the US government's entire money will probably be exhausted. You might be wondering if, in case money runs out, America will declare itself bankrupt. A country does not declare itself bankrupt. Rather, this situation often arises as a result of economic and financial instability. The concept of bankruptcy applies to both companies and individuals when they lack sufficient resources to clear their liabilities or debt. However, in the case of a country, the situation is complex and involves multiple factors. An indicator of a country becoming bankrupt is when it experiences a severe financial crisis, and the government is unable to meet its financial obligations. Some common signs include high fiscal deficit. If a country's fiscal deficit becomes excessively large, indicating that the government is taking on significant debt to cover its expenses, it can be an indicator. Trade imbalance. If a country is spending a considerable amount on imports and its exports are low, it can lead to a trade imbalance, a sign of economic strain. Currency depreciation. If a country's currency is depreciating, meaning its value is decreasing compared to other currencies, it can be another indicator. Interest rate crisis. If interest rates are very high and the government is unable to control them, it can create a problem. When these factors combine and a country cannot meet its financial obligations, it in fact becomes bankrupt. Like Argentina defaulted on its debt in 2001. This means that the country was unable to pay its creditors back the money they had loaned it. This led to a lot of economic hardship for the Argentine people, as the value of their currency fell and inflation skyrocketed. Another example is Greece. In 2015, Greece was on the verge of defaulting on its debt. The country was only able to avoid this by accepting a bailout from the European Union. However, the terms of the bailout and the Greek people have had to make many sacrifices in order to meet the conditions of the loan. However, the term bankruptcy is not directly applied, and various steps are taken to stabilize the economy, such as economic reforms, international aid, austerity measures, etc. Here's an interesting thing to tell you. America can never go bankrupt or face difficulties. Yes, you heard it right. But how? Because when America earns $100, even if it spends $134, it won't go bankrupt. The answer to this is America's unlimited money. Didn't understand? All right, give me just 3 minutes and I'll explain it to you in simple words. There's a website called US Debt Clock. It shows real-time figures about US debt tax revenue and spending. According to this website, the national debt of the USA is $31 trillion. America is the top economy in the world. This economy has one such a superpower that no other country has. That superpower is the ability to borrow unlimited money. America knows that it can take as much loan as it wants, there is no one to ask it. Because the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. This is printed by the USA's Federal Reserve. The world's 80% trade is in the US dollar. Now, what's the difference between the US dollar and other currencies? If China prints unlimited money, then buying dollars will become difficult for China. That's why China has to carefully decide in the monetary policy how much money should be in circulation. We can't print unlimited money, but America just doesn't have this limitation because the whole world sees the US dollar as a stable currency. So, till now we have seen 3 things that make the US currency different from other currencies. Before the First World War until 1914, the major world currencies were backed by an equivalent value of gold kept in their respective treasuries. But how did the world accept US dollars in the first place? Each currency had its value backed by gold. However, during World War I, all European countries depleted their gold reserves. The gold standard essentially collapsed, leading to the dominance of the United States dollar. In 1944, an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement was established. It decided that the US dollar would be the central currency, and other countries pegged their currencies to the dollar. This arrangement made the US dollar the world's primary reserve currency. Currently, central banks worldwide hold about 59% of their reserves in US dollars. After the Bretton Woods Agreement, the world operated under the gold standard until 1971, when President Nixon removed the gold standard. This move gave the US dollar unprecedented control, as it was no longer tied to gold, and it became the primary reserve currency globally. In today's world, the US dollar plays a central role in international transactions. For instance, in situations like the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the US can exert control through sanctions, limiting which countries can engage in transactions using the US dollar. In the realm of global trade, even if India wants to purchase goods from Germany, the transaction often involves converting Indian rupees to US dollars, which are then transferred to the German seller. The dollars are later converted into euros. This process incurs additional conversion charges and allows control over the use of the US dollar. But what's the advantage of keeping the US dollars? The king of convenience. Imagine trying to buy something at a global market, but the vendors only accept obscure, rarely traded currencies. That's the hassle countries face without US dollars. The USD is like the lingua franca of global trade, accepted everywhere and easily exchanged for other currencies. This liquidity and ease of use make it the go-to currency for central banks holding reserves. Stability is key. Just like nobody wants a wobbly table, no central bank wants a volatile currency in their reserves. The US economy, despite its occasional hiccups, is considered a safe haven. This stability translates to the dollar, making it a reliable store of value for central banks, protecting their reserves from sudden crashes. The power of history. Remember that old saying, history repeats itself? Well, in the world of finance, the past often paves the way for the future. The USD has been the dominant reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. This historical head start means most international transactions are already denominated in dollars, creating a self-perpetuating cycle where its dominance is hard to challenge. The American advantage. The U.S. economy is a powerhouse with a deep and liquid financial market. This means U.S. treasuries, government bonds essentially, are seen as safe investments, attracting foreign buyers, including central banks. By holding these treasuries, central banks not only get a solid return on their investment, but also strengthen their ties with the U.S., potentially gaining political and economic benefits. However, the U.S. dollar's dominance isn't without its critics. Some argue it gives the U.S. undue influence in the global financial system, while others worry about the potential for future U.S. economic instability to ripple through the world. Nonetheless, for now, the U.S. dollar remains the king of the Forex reserve castle. But soon, it seems that the dollar will not be able to remain the world's reserve currency for much longer, meaning America, which has been using the dollar as a weapon since the 19th century, will no longer be able to do so. Let me explain in more detail why I am saying this. As of January 2022, Japan held $1.3 trillion in U.S. securities, while China possessed $1.06 trillion and the UK held $608 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds. The total U.S. foreign and international investor holdings amounted to $7 trillion as of September 2021, surpassing the combined GDP of France, India, and Russia. This substantial sum underscores the U.S. dollar's threefold significance as a trusted medium for trade, a means to purchase oil, and a repository for excess forex reserves, commonly referred to as petrodollar. Notably, both Russia and China, dissatisfied with U.S. actions, formed an alliance to challenge the dominant position of the U.S. dollar. The geopolitical landscape involves a power play where leverage plays a pivotal role. Russia, being a major oil and gas producer, employed a strategic move by requiring unfriendly nations to purchase Russian oil in rubles, compelling European countries, despite their reservations, to hold ruble reserves in the Russian central bank. This shift mirrors the traditional role of dollar reserves in supporting the U.S. economy, marking the emergence of the petro-ruble. Examining Russia's efforts to reduce dependency on the dollar, it is evident that since 2014, the country has strategically decreased its dollar reserves. The graph illustrates a decline in U.S. treasuries from $150 billion in 2013 to a mere $3.98 billion in 2021. This deliberate move aligns with Russia's long-term plan to diminish reliance on the dollar and signals the ascent of the petro-ruble as a prominent player in global economic dynamics. The leverage that Russia holds over Europe is akin to China's influence through the Belt and Road Initiative countries. In the case of BRI, a massive $3 trillion project, China has provided generous loans to numerous countries worldwide. Notably, 165 countries under the BRI owe a collective debt of $385 billion to China. Some nations, such as Pakistan and Sri Lanka, find themselves unable to repay these substantial debts. China, strategically seizing this leverage, may urge these indebted countries to settle their loans in yuan. To sweeten the deal, China could offer a 1% discount on interest payments, a significant incentive for countries grappling with economic challenges. Notably, since the initiation of the BRI, China has already issued 14% of its loans in yuan, showcasing a move away from dependence on the US dollar. Furthermore, China's role as the largest trade partner with 25 BRI participating countries strengthens its trade leverage. Combining both trade and debt, China could exert pressure on these nations to adopt the yuan instead of the dollar. While many of these countries are economically challenged, the question arises, how can China and Russia persuade wealthier nations like England and South Korea to bypass the dollar? Russia aligns itself with China, notably endorsing the Chinese yuan as a reserve currency. Additionally, countries engage in bilateral currency swap agreements, a strategy also pursued by India with its allies. In this agreement, for instance, if China and the UK sign a 5-year swap valued at $1 million, they exchange yuan for pounds. This arrangement allows central banks to sell or lend the acquired currency domestically, eliminating exchange risk and reducing dependency on the US dollar. Beijing has orchestrated more than 3 trillion yuan worth of bilateral currency swap deals, with over 40 countries globally, reducing reliance on the dollar and enhancing economic ties. Notably, China's status as the world's largest manufacturer provides an additional lever to encourage companies to transact in yuan, a move that could be bolstered further if Saudi Arabia decides to sell oil in yuan. This strategic shift could attract countries to invest in yuan, reinforcing China's economic progress and challenging the dominance of the US dollar as the reserve currency. In essence, China and Russia are methodically constructing currency strategies to challenge the US dollar's supremacy. I told you what is the plan of China and Russia to end the supermassiveness of the dollar, but how did America get this massive superpower? The thing is, in 1973, a deal was made between America and Saudi Arabia. It is called a petrodollar agreement, from where America's journey to become a superpower started. This agreement as such was simple. Money for oil will be given in dollars. Now think, will a country like Saudi Arabia or any other big country keep millions of dollars tied up in the vault? Not at all. They have to invest that money somewhere. And where do they invest? Back in America, by buying treasury bills and bonds. Transaction looks somewhat like this. Saudi Arabia sells oil to America and earns money in dollars. It gives this dollar back to America with a promise that you give me treasury bills and also give interest on them. That is why dollars and treasury bills are also in constant demand. Many foreign countries hold treasury bills. Among the $31 trillion American debt, 25% is held by other countries. According to the data of January 2023, Japan is the largest holder of the US debt, worth $1.1 trillion. The second largest holder is China, holding $859 billion. The United Kingdom also holds treasury bonds worth $668 billion. This is only 25%. From whom is the remaining 75% loan taken? From aliens? No, from the American public. The other government departments, such as Social Security trusts, Federal Reserve, hold around $6.8 trillion debt. The remaining debt is held by the American public. That is, American companies, mutual funds, investors, etc. But what if America runs out of money anyway? If America runs out of money, it would have a significant impact on the global economy. The United States is the world's largest economy, and it is a major borrower of funds from other countries. If the US were to default on its debts, it would trigger a global financial crisis. The US government would not be able to pay its bills, including its debts to foreign investors, its social security obligations, and its military spending. This would lead to a loss of confidence in the US government and its currency, the dollar. As a result, interest rates would rise, and the stock market would crash. The US economy would also suffer. Businesses would be hesitant to invest, and consumers would cut back on spending. This would lead to a recession, with high unemployment and business failures. The rest of the world would also be affected by a US default. The global economy is interconnected, and a recession in the US would have a ripple effect on other countries. Businesses in other countries that export to the US would be hurt, and countries that hold US debt would see the value of their investments decline. While making this video, a news came that both the political parties of America have agreed that they will increase the debt ceiling. There was going to be a similar crisis in 2021. Even then, they increased the debt ceiling. And even now, they will increase the debt ceiling. There are no two views about this. America has never defaulted so far. Even after this, it will never do so. Even in 2011, America's money was on the verge of exhaustion. Stock markets had crashed by some 20%. For the first time after World War I, the global trust in America was shaken. Political and financial risks had increased. Because of this, the American rating was downgraded from AAA to AA. Let's imagine a scenario in the world of sports. Suppose there's a star athlete who has consistently won gold medals in a particular competition from the beginning of their career. Every year they dominate the competition, securing the first position without fail. However, in a surprising turn of events, they unexpectedly finished 5th in the most recent competition. This unexpected change in performance could create chaos, not only in the athlete's personal life, but also among their fans, coaches, and the sports community at large. The same happened in the financial markets. Stock markets crashed 20%. As they say, history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Stock markets will fall, the global trust in America will dip, economy will be at risk. All this is going to happen due to the government's mistakes. During the COVID pandemic, as people stayed home, the US printed $3 trillion in 2020, equivalent to India's annual GDP. This was part of a strategy called quantitative easing, a fancy term for pumping money into the economy. The intention was to prevent short-term economic distress by distributing money to the people. However, this approach, while providing immediate relief, has long-term consequences. It often leads to inflation and a higher cost of living. The US has a significant budget deficit, reaching 4.6% of GDP in 2019. In essence, the US economy has plenty of money to spend, but the resources remain limited. Picture this. America is a car that broke down due to the pandemic, stranded on the road. The government tried pushing it to keep it moving temporarily, hoping a mechanic would arrive. Instead, as the car approached a dangerous chasm, it became crucial to halt the pushing. Continuing to push would risk the car falling into the chasm. Now, the American economy needs a push from the other side to avoid further trouble. So if the US defaults, it could even lead to a liquidity crisis across the world. Thirdly, all US trade partners will get heavily affected because US citizens will consume less, and since US is one of the biggest consumption markets in the world, it will heavily affect every country that trades with the US, and finally countries like Argentina and Zimbabwe that are currently using the dollar in place of their own currency will completely lose trust in the dollar. And they will move on to another currency. And lastly, considering the new BRICS currency and the rise of the digital yuan and digital rupee, we could be looking at the rise of another giant superpower, or even better, a cluster of nations that together will act as a superpower. So while the US will not default on its debt today, someday this is bound to happen, and every nation needs to be very well prepared for this D-Day.